Bring a Trailer podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bring a Trailer podcast. Alex Porter here, Director of Auction Production for the company. Thrilled to be joined by Kim Barnes today. Kim Barnes works for Michelin. She is a business development manager. Kim, thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me, Alex. I really appreciate it.
Kim, you've got a fascinating background. We have so much ground to cover, as we were talking about before I started recording here. We've got all the kind of Michelin stuff to talk about, but also you've got a fascinating personal background with cars too, including being a Concours judge. You're interested in all kinds of fascinating cars, and I want to talk about all of it. But maybe we could start with you and your kind of background with cars. Where does it all start? What got you interested in cars in the first place? Were you a kid who was into cars?
Absolutely. And I think this interview will be really different from a lot of your other interviews. One, I'm a woman. You've had some women on here, which is great, but
not enough, Kim.
And it's just different. I also grew up in the 60s and 70s, so I'm younger than pretty much everybody at BAT and a lot of your listeners, but it was really a different era, particularly for women. I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, child of a single mother who knows nothing about cars. She did have a distant cousin who was the editor of Motor Trend. So maybe my interest in cars, maybe there is something genetic there, that kind of brought it on. But I had always loved cars. When I was in the second grade, we lived in an apartment complex, and I could look out my bedroom window, and my second grade teacher lived on the other side of the parking lot, and she drove a 63 split window Corvette. It was red. And I was like obsessed with this car. So I would wake up and set my alarm to wake up at night on Saturday night and try to catch her coming back in from her date, because she would always let her dates drive the car and they'd come like flying into the parking lot. And then it was kind of different to actually have a teacher who dated, because this is like the late 1960s. And I'd go back into school the next day and talk about seeing Miss Passion, and that was actually her name, Miss Passion, coming back from her dates in her red Corvette. And like once she kissed one of them, and it was like really scandalous to come back to the second grade and talk about that. So that was kind of my first car thing. Then we had a neighbor who was restoring an MGTC. I lived in the Midwest. There weren't very many, British cars there. I'd never seen a right-hand drive car. And he would give me little parts to bring home and clean. Unfortunately, I cleaned them in my mother's white enamel sink, and she pretty much hated that. And the whole thing of me being into cars as a little kid was very disturbing to my mother. She just wanted a little girl that would do ballet and tap. So the more I did with cars, the more she pushed me to ballet and tap lessons, until finally the instructor called my mother and said I had the least talent for dance of any student she'd ever had, and she should please let me quit. So that kind of put an end to that. And, I did weird stuff like the Partridge Family was kind of all the rage when I was a little kid, and they had sort of baseball cards, but they had the Partridge Family on them, and all my girlfriends and I collected them. But I also collected ones with images of cars. My favorite one had a gremlin on it, and I still have the card. And last year I finally got the gremlin. So
wow.
But then when I grew up a little bit, I didn't like babysitting. Plus, it didn't pay very well. And there was really nothing else to do when you were like 12 years old. So I started a little business restoring the Schwinn crate bicycles. Remember the lemon peeler, the apple crate, the orange crate? And we lived in a townhouse then. The only tools my mother had was a screwdriver and a hammer. So I went out, bought tools, hung out at the bicycle store, learned how to like wet sand, repaint, fix the sprockets, fix the brakes. So that was kind of before cars, but I also like motorcycles. I have motorcycles. So that's kind of my first foray into things that go fast.
That's amazing. What a story, Kim. MGTCs too. I remember the first time I saw one. That's a car that gets you excited about cars. They have such incredible presence when you stand next to one, especially as a kid.
Yeah. And then Love Story had come out, but I was too young to see it. But they had the MGTC in the advertisements for it. So I think I had one of those on my bedroom wall.
Have you owned one?
I have not. Nope, I've driven one. But I've had a lot of MGs. I actually drove an MGB GT for 350,000 miles as a
Whoa.
daily driver.
Amazing.
For work, back when women had to wear like pantyhose. Um, no air conditioning, I just opened the quarter windows and the side vents, and the thing stayed really cool, but it was an awesome car. So
Love those cars. What was your first car? The first car
car
you owned?
was I started driving in 76 and Charlie's Angels was on. And I'm not 100% sure, but I know from talking to somebody who worked for Aaron Spelling Productions that was one of the first product placement, like paid conscious product placement opportunities. Back in the 60s, automotive manufacturers supplied cars to television shows, but there was really no revenue involved. It was just free cars and a way to showcase them. Well, with Charlie's Angels, of course, they had the orange Pinto, the white Cobra with the blue stripes, and the yellow Mustang 2 Ghia. And every time it cut to commercial, when it came back, you saw the three cars parked in front of the office. And it was for like a certain number of seconds. And I think that was kind of the product placement. So that was basically Ford did a great job. That got me into Ford's cars at the time when I started driving. So I really, really wanted the Kate Jackson orange Pinto because I thought everybody was all about Farrah Fawcett, and that product placement brought in a lot of revenue for Ford with that Mustang 2 and kind of put the Mustang 2 and the Cobra 2 on the map. But I thought Kate Jackson was like the cooler angel. She was more like me. So I really wanted that orange Pinto with the all glass back and the white vinyl top and the plaid seats. But I couldn't afford it. So I got a white 77 Pinto. I did get the all glass back, but it had the rally package. So it was white with red stripes, mag wheels, race white letter tires, red interior, 4-speed, and it did have the all glass back. But I'd never driven a 4-speed because I'd had, actually my mother didn't own cars off and on. I actually took my driver's test on a borrowed car. But I watched. We went to a Ford dealer, looked for a car. I brought my mother. I watched the dealer demo it. I'm like, how hard could this really be? You just press the accelerator and let the extra pedal out. So we bought the car. My mother's in the passenger seat, and I have to bring it home. It was awful. There was one red light on a hill. I think it turned green like 3 times before I finally got going. It was very bad. It was kind of an early lesson on just admit when you don't know something. So yeah, first car was a Ford Pinto.
That's trial by fire, teaching yourself how to do it on the way back.
Very stupid. Now, when I don't know something, I just ask a question.
That's an impressive level of maturity. I don't even know if I always do that, Kim, but that is a good life lesson. Do you miss that car ever?
I do. And I miss the Kate Jackson orange Pinto that I couldn't afford. So I'm always on the lookout for that. There's one locally that's for sale from time to time, but they took the turbo motor out of the T-Bird and put it in. And I'm kind of all about originality. So, that sort of crosses it off. But if I ever found that orange Pinto with the orange plaid interior, I'd be all over it.
Keep watching BAT. One will pop up eventually, I bet.
Always do.
I had one of those turbo Thunderbirds, the 80s cars. I really liked that car.
They are cool. Yeah.
They are cool. Yeah.
Especially the Fila edition.
Totally. So as you're growing up and getting older, I'm curious about the path that lands you with Michelin eventually. Did you always want to work in a career that involved cars? Was that always the plan or something you wanted to do?
It was always the plan, but it was really difficult. When I was in high school, I worked in the auto shows. So I was 16. I went to a temp agency because I found out that the sort of models that were up on the turnstiles with the car and the nice dresses, they were supplied, at least we were living in Baltimore now. They were supplied in Baltimore by temp agencies. So I went to the temp agency and said, I want to work in the car industry and I think this is a good entry level job. And they hired me. Wow. So I did Ford, I did General Motors, and I did Fiat. And I wore my prom dress because you had to come with a nice dress. And that's pretty much all I had. And Fiat ended asking me to do some print ads. So I ended up doing print ads for a Fiat Spider 2000, which was my second car. Then, because of something I said when I was working for GM or assigned to GM, I wasn't asked back. And it like devastated me. I think it was the Delta 88 in 1977 that actually had a Chevrolet engine. And we were given, as spokespeople, we were given a script. Like they teach you how to open the door, so it's kind of elegant and maybe sexy. They teach you how to get in the car in your dress so it looks nice. And they give you a script of some very, very, very basic things to say. Well, I thought that was boring. So when people would ask me questions, if I knew the answers, I always answered the questions. And then I made the fatal flaw of talking about the Chevrolet engine in the Oldsmobile, and I was never asked back.
Man.
Yeah. So that was my.
So actually knowing about cars in some ways set you back.
It set me way back, right out of a job. So,
not to interrupt, Kim, but I'm curious if you could characterize the industry at that time. I mean, there must have been almost no women around, right?
No, there really weren't. And like I tried to take auto shop in high school. We had a body shop, we had mechanical shop, wouldn't let me do it. I had to take home ec. That was just kind of what the industry was. And it was like when I talked to Ferrari about doing the auto show, they said, no, voluptuous enough. Can you imagine saying that to someone at a job interview today?
Straight to lawsuit.
I know.
Straight to lawsuit.
But apparently then...
Although maybe Ferrari's still like that. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past Ferrari to still have a little bit of that.
And in all fairness, it wasn't Ferrari. It was probably their ad agency. But I looked at it and I thought, wow, that's the coolest car here. Let me see if I can, get a job talking about them. And whoever Ferrari had hired to hire spokespeople, that's what they said. So yeah, that was kind of the state of the auto industry at that point. And that was the late 70s.
Yeah. And so I presume, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I've only known you for a little bit, but that probably only steals your reserve to break into the industry even more, I'm guessing.
It was, I don't know. I didn't know how to do it. I love, like one of the things I like doing now is trying to help younger people. I mean, I absolutely love it. And that's because back when I was in high school, if you went to see the guidance counselor, it's because you did something bad. There wasn't the mentorship programs that there are now. And that's why I think they're so important. It's a big thing now, but it was not when I was growing up. And, I had a single mother who had 2 jobs. I didn't know anybody in the automotive industry. I didn't have any connections. So I kind of gave up on it. I ended up going to college, working on Wall Street, then working in the advertising industry for quite a while, but always kind of kept the car hobby going. My husband was a blind date set up by his ex-wife because I liked cars. We'd be like, kind of hanging out in bars, trying to talk to guys like you do. And I'd look at a guy's hands. If they didn't look like maybe he worked on cars, I wasn't really interested. So my husband's ex-wife was there and she's like, so what are you looking for? Like, what's wrong with him? I said, I really need a guy that likes cars and even better cars and motorcycles. So she's like, you're the girl my ex-husband should have married, and proceeded to set me up on a blind date with her ex-husband. So that kind of got my car thing back and going. I was in the advertising business, printing business then. But, and my husband kept saying, you should try to work on Motor Week. The show, it was on PBS then.
Sure.
Try to work on Motor Week. I really just never had the confidence to do it. But I started showing cars, restoring them, showing them. I was asked to judge. Then our advertising business was primarily print. Well, when the internet, got really big, print went away, and so did the money. So I started working for a motorsports club in New York, putting on a Concours and building and managing collections for them. Then that kind of changed direction, and that's when I went over to Michelin. So I've really only been with Michelin for 5 years. Okay,
interesting. You obviously had the background that kind of landed you in the position you're in with Michelin, but we were so excited. I can speak for myself when Bring a Trailer was able to partner with Michelin. It's like one of the most storied, awesome brands around. It must have been an exciting opportunity for you too, right? I mean, it's such an iconic company.
It was, and I got very, very lucky. I had a short list of companies that I would like to work for, and one was Michelin. just from meeting people that worked for Michelin and the good things they had to say about the company and the number of years they'd worked there. So Michelin is in Greenville, South Carolina, and I couldn't relocate. One, because it would cost a lot of money to move all my cars there, just one of the big reasons. But they had advertised for a job in their commercial truck division. So I thought, I can learn truck. And I took that job, and I kept waiting. I knew I wanted this vintage job. Like, I just really wanted this job. And I got very lucky that after 2.5 years, the job opened. And I think they got quite a few applications for it, but I was very lucky to get it.
So you had your eyes on vintage classic tires right from
day
the start.
One.
Yeah. Well, I'm 41 years old, and for a long time, you basically had to upgrade your wheels on a car to be able to put modern tires on it. So the last 10, maybe 20 years have been, from my perspective, at least, kind of revolutionary. Now you can get the right, like, wheels and tires are maybe the most important thing for how a car looks, in my opinion. And so being able to get period look tires on your car has really changed the game, I think.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that we've never stopped making the tires. We invented the radial, and we've never, ever stopped making them. It's just that they weren't really marketed in the US. One of the saddest things is, I like Mustangs. I have a Mustang. Walking through a Mustang show and see how many Fox body cars that were OE with TRX have been converted to like a TRX lookalike, because people didn't realize that we never stopped making the TRX.
Yeah.
So that makes me sad, because what Ford did in 1979 when they put the TRX, on that car, they were trying to bring European handling to the US, and it did it, and it worked. So, when you make the change, you don't really get that same feel. So I really feel badly that, so many people thought that the tires weren't available when they really were. They were just a little difficult to get. So that was my kind of big mission when Michelin put me in this job, was to change that.
It's so interesting you say that, because the older I get, the more, when I buy a car and it's been modified, I like to revert it back to how it was designed, to get as close to how it was designed. It's like, these engineers know what they're doing, right? And so, cars often, people put aftermarket suspension on, they get too stiff. They put polyurethane mounts all over the place, and they often change the wheels and tires. And man, I love to feel a car how it would have felt in period. And I had a colleague say he put, I think they were XWXs, whatever, a 165 series vintage Michelin tire on his Alpha. And he's like, it completely brought it back to how it was supposed to be. And it changed it all for the better, right? Like, what's wrong with body roll and soft side? This is what you want. This is how it was designed, It
really is. Pre-power steering, car manufacturers had to work a lot harder with steering and suspension to make it work with a certain tire. So they really did.
Yep.
They kind of like motorcycles are today. I love professional motorcycle racing, and they really designed the motorcycle around the tire, which is a little bit how cars were pre-power steering. So they would look at the flex in a sidewall, the tread patterns available, and really design the suspension and steering around that, so that it feels like it did when the car was new. And I am mystified by, particularly in the US, the need to fill the wheel well with space. It's kind of like, people that feel like they need to talk when there's silence. It's kind of like, why do we have to necessarily fill this void? And is it a good thing? Because, when you put a modern tire on a vintage car, yes, it might fit the space. There's no rub. You can still turn lock to lock, but you really are changing the handling experience. Maybe some people like that. I, like you, I'm such a purist. I like cars to handle like they were designed kind of back in the day.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. I also it's interesting you mentioned steering. I get, it rattles me when I see a non-power steering car with a little tiny aftermarket steering wheel. I'm like, no, that big thing was there for a reason. It's there for some leverage.
Exactly. It is called leverage. Yes. Now, if you put power steering in it, that's a whole different thing. Then you can change the steering wheel. Yeah. But for old steering, you definitely need that leverage.
And it never looks right
It
anyway,
doesn't.
Kim. It always looks better with the big, skinny
It
steering
does.
wheel.
Yeah, it does.
But again, that's something when I was younger, I had all the problems you mentioned. I still speak when there's silence. So I still am working on that one. But I wanted tires that filled up the wheel well and all that. And I've really changed my tune. I have a very early NSX and it had big aftermarket wheels and they were kind of filling out the wheel wells. And now I've got the little 15-inch front wheels and 16-inch rear wheels back on with a stock tire size, and they sit in and the car rides softer and it's no power steering. So it drives better. Everything's better about it, right? Those Honda folks knew what they were doing. So again.
Yeah, that's my feeling. We had, last week I was in Monterey for Car Week, as you guys were. And we had a booth at Porsche Works. And I wanted a yellow car or a blue car to go with Michelin's colors. So there was a BAT alumni car, a 356B in Condor yellow.
Oh, the best. That's such a
good car. It's such a good car. So I had a friend of a friend who knew the buyer. So I called the buyer, and it had older 185s on it. And they really needed to be replaced anyway. So I asked him if I could put 165, which would have been the OE size, XASs on it, which is the asymmetrical tread. He's like, yeah, sure, that's great. And then the first time he drove it was to Car Week. And so he pulls into Works, gets out, and like the first thing he said is, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much better this car handles, how much more fun it is. You know, it's just with the proper size tire. I think it looks better. I don't really like it when tires like bulge out from the wheel like that. It just, to me, is not the vintage look. But he was super, super excited. And I thought, great. You know, it created a really good talking point, because at shows, that is one of the most common questions. And I still get people that come up and, yeah, I've got a 356. How large of a tire can I put on it? So then, you know, my next response is, so why are you asking that question?
Yep. Totally. Man, I have a yellow Porsche that I just put new Michelin tires on. I should have driven that over
next year.
I know. Well, it's I believe, now I'm speaking out of turn, it's a 996 GT3, which is not quite a vintage car, but it's almost 20 years old now. And it was designed, Michelins were designed for the car, absolutely. Right? So they're either specific to that car or they're only on a few other cars. So you have to get just the right tire for it.
Yep. No, we would love to have you next year. We actually had an extra spot. And the other car we had, the person got COVID. So we had an opening. We would have loved to have had your car there.
I had it there. It was right there. It was in Monterey. I drove it down there. Can you, Kim, we were talking about this before we started recording. Can you school me a little bit on all these vintage tires that Michelin offers? There's so many cool ones, and some of them have different labelings and brands. And I've always been a little bit confused. The famous one is the X tires, right? The XWX, the XZX, or even there's just an X. So maybe you could start by telling me what the difference with all those are.
Sure. The Michelin Classic tire line, what we try to do is, like we've been talking about, is recreate the original driving experience. You know, that's kind of the point of the tire line. People ask me sometimes, is it like the exact rubber that you used in 1965? No, because you can't get it anymore. People say, is the casing the same? You get people that really, really know tires. They'll be like, oh, is the casing? Have you made any changes? You always have to make changes as production modernizes. But what we do is we maintain the handling. So one of the big things with classic tires is like sidewall flex. So what we do is we try very, very hard to keep the same sidewall flex that the tire had initially, because that's what all these manufacturers were building their car around, is the amount of the sidewall flex. The other thing on especially the earlier classic tires is when you look at the tread, it's kind of round shaped, as opposed to like our modern, say our Pilot Sport, very, very flat tread surface. And then when you go over to the sidewalls, it's a very like abrupt, almost right angle transition, or very, very heavy tread blocks there. So if you look at the older tires,
which is part of what ruins the look.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
not the right look. It's a very modern look. And it also changes handling. So when you look at the classic tires, the tread has a roundness to it, and the outside tread blocks, both on the inside and the outside, actually almost roll over into the sidewall. That's a handling feature, and that is how cars were designed to handle. So that's kind of the goal with the classic tires. Also, for Concours judging and things like that, they're all marked in the same way, but we really want people to have the correct handling experience. So that's sort of the goal. And the X was our first radial. We still have the radial X. I own two Duchevaux, and that was one of the first cars. It was a Lancia Ariel in, I think, 1939 that had the first OE radial, Michelin, on it. It was sold with radials. But the Duchevaux, I think, is really the best example of how important a tire is. And it was OE with the Michelin X. I run 26 pounds in them because, as you know, the Duchevaux or 2CVs have very, very unusual suspension. And sidewall flex is a very, very big part of it. I run 26 pounds. If I go to 28, it has a noticeable handling difference. So the sidewall flex of the original Michelin X is really, really well illustrated on the Duchevaux. But then as time evolved, we got the XWX and the XAS. The original X developed some cousins as time went by. The XAS, which is what we put on the 356B, was the asymmetrical tread pattern, which worked for handling in the wet and cornering, particularly cornering. So we still have that line. We have the XWX line, which cars started to get a lot more horsepower. That's kind of what the XWX came out. The Mura had it, kind of in that era when cars started to have a lot more horsepower. That's when we introduced the XWX. We talked a little bit about the TRX, and how unique and special that tire is.
Which is a metric sizing, right?
It's different sizing. It's metric sizing.
Yeah.
And the TRX it's kind of a mystery to most people. It's not just the size. It's just the size is kind of a coincidence. But that was a wheel and bead designed to work together with the bead on the tire. So basically, pre-TRX, when a tire flexed in corners, the bulge that sort of comes out during cornering, the stress was in a very pointed place. What the TRX did with the bead design is allow the tire to flex differently and not so pointed, and it spread the stress. And that's what made it corner so much better. So it's actually made for a special wheel with a special bead and a tire with a special bead, and the sizing happens to be metric. So we have those.
I really did. I needed to be schooled on all this. So
yeah,
this is all very helpful.
The TRX is just kind of a mystery to people. We have a lot of our tires come in white walls, because we realize that there's some demand for that. We've got the Pilot Sport PS2 series marked for Porsches and a couple of other cars. We've got, the Pilot Sports with the V, kind of like V tread pattern that was so popular. That's still here. Pilot Exalto goes down to 13 inches. That's a great traditional old world kind of performance tire. We've got the XM&S 244, which was OE on some Land Rovers and other four-wheel drive vehicles. All those tires are still here. So, and then another sort of common misnomer, because this line hasn't been advertised in the US for very long, is Michelin owns BF Goodrich, and we also own Uniroyal. Those are our three primary brands. And the Silvertown was a very, very well-known BF Goodrich tire. It's a red line, it's a wide white, it's a narrow white, really, really good tire that was OE on quite a few cars, or a replacement tire when OEs weren't available. That is made under license by Coker Tire for BF Goodrich. So the Silvertown is the only tire that's kind of in the family that is not made in Michelin factories. The entire rest of the classic line is made in Michelin factories by Michelin in Europe. So there's a lot of confusion around those points. And we also make tubes. We realize that a lot of wheels need tubes, and there's a lot of questions on that. I'm trying to think of what kind of questions do I get when I go to shows. And at the BAT event, either in Pittsburgh or Laguna Seca, I had this question a couple of times. It's like, if it's a tubeless tire, do I need a tube? And can I put a tube in it? So our tires are marked tubeless, which most of them are, with the exception of a couple bias-plies that we make for older cars. And you can always put a tube in a tubeless tire as long as the aspect ratio is 70 or greater. You never put tubes in low profile tires. And a very common situation is a wire wheel car. Even though our tire says it's tubeless, with a couple exceptions, most wire wheel cars require a tube. So it's always fine to do that. But if a tire says tubeless and your wheel doesn't require a tube, you don't need a tube.
Gotcha. I really needed this education, and you really are giving it to me, which I really appreciate. A bunch of my colleagues spoke to you at the Pittsburgh Alumni Gathering, and they were like, Kim's great. You're going to love talking to her. And we loved having you at the event in Monterey. I wish I'd shaken your hand, but I did see the Michelin Man there, and that was fantastic.
Where Viv is, I am usually not far behind. He is my most consistent date beyond my husband.
Kim, you were going to also explain the difference between bias-ply and radials for all of us. I know you mentioned some of our users might already know the difference, but I'm a dummy and I need the explainer. So can you give me the primer on that?
Sure. It's a really common question when I go to live events, or it's people that have bias-plies on their car because they have it judged. And it's kind of like, what's the difference and how much better will a radial be? Well, first, what's the difference? So a bias-ply has the word plies in the description. So what the ply is they are the pieces of fabric used to create the casing. So in a bias-ply, the plies run from one bead all the way down the sidewall, across what's the tread of the tire, and up the other sidewall. So basically, the tire is kind of one piece. So if you think about kind of one U-shaped piece of heavy fabric covered with rubber, when you turn a corner and the sidewall flexes, that is also affecting the tread. So when you turn a corner hard and the sidewall flexes, a little bit of the tread leaves the ground. And anything that happens to the sidewalls affects the tread because they're effectively all one system. So what radials did is separate the tread from the sidewalls. So there is still, pieces of fabric and things that create the carcass of the tire, but the sidewalls function independently of the tread. So you can go through the hardest corner that have a lot of sidewall flex and your tread doesn't leave the ground. So that's the really simple answer that hopefully helps people decide, if they don't like the way their car handles and it has bias plies, that's the change you're going to get from radials. And then people have to decide if that's going to solve their problem and if they're okay not having what the car came with initially.
No wonder Michelin puts you out in front of everybody. Kim, that's about the best, most succinct explanation I've ever heard of that. And I really appreciate it. It's about contact patch, right? You're losing contact patch when you've got a bias ply. Mm-hmm. Man, what a great explanation. Do we need to put you back out on a turntable from the sexist days of cars and you can explain to everyone in front?
No, just don't ask me any harder questions. That's a pretty simple one.
Well, trust me, we're extending as far as my brain works already. So, no, but much appreciated. That's awesome. You mentioned in that, and I think I mentioned up top, that folks care about some of these correct looking tires and period correct tires for judging purposes when they have their car out on a concours. And that is another area where you are kind of a pro and is an area I'd love to dig into. How far back does I presume showing cars came before judging them, but talk a little bit about your history with Concours events.
They did. The first car that I really had restored to absolute OE Concours quality was a 1964 Sunbeam Alpine, which I still have. And I took that to the first Concours, which was the Hilton Head Concours, and it did really well. And when the judges came by, the chairman of the Concours was also with them. And I guess gave a pretty succinct summary of the car. You don't want to talk too much because judges have a very limited amount of time with each car, but you do want to get a couple of important points out there. So it was enough to get their attention of, hey, this person really knows cars. So then they called me and said, kind of, where did you come from? Everyone always says, whose daughter are you or who are you married to?
More condescending.
Yeah, it totally isn't condescending. It's just, curiosity. But I just kind of came out of nowhere. And so then Hilton Head was kind enough to ask me if I wanted to judge. And so their show really started my whole Concours showing experience and then my whole Concours judging experience. And then once you're doing it and hopefully, doing it fairly well, other Concours, will go and ask you to judge. And there is, the car hobby has not been, the most diversified always. So there's definitely a lot of interest in getting women, minorities, things like that into the judging world. And I'm 100% sure that helped. I
Totally.
may not have been asked to judge if I wasn't a woman, but that always sort of opens the door. But then you really kind of have to prove yourself. And sometimes there's people looking for you to fail because you just got something because you're a woman. And then they're like almost waiting to watch you fail.
Yeah.
So as soon as I got the opportunities, I tried to do them well.
My dad likes kind of pre-war cars, and I've been around some Concours judging, and it's a tough world where people are pretty confident in their own knowledge. It's a tough place to break into, I think, kind of regardless. And so, being a woman to boot must have been tricky. What era was that all starting for you, Kim?
2010.
Oh, okay, fairly recently. Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And have you been focused mainly on British cars?
No, I like. They try to give you what obviously.
Sure.
So British, French, I've had micro cars. I love preservation because I like very, very original cars, and that's becoming a class now. And Concours are now starting to embrace the next generation of car collectors, which I love and I encourage. So I've done JDM cars. I've done Malaise era cars.
I've got a term that we always struggle with, even though it's convenient and I use it all the time. It's kind of mean spirited, but
the term Malaise.
Yeah.
Well, that's Jimmy Carter. I think 1979 in the Crisis of Confidence speech.
Yeah, totally.
Which is not, that doesn't have a real good ring to it.
No. Even if he was right, no one likes to hear it. That's the problem.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And yes, 350 cubic inch Chevys not making a lot of HP in 1979 or 1977.
I think the worst was the Ford 460 cubic inch made like 200 horsepower.
Oh, it's tough.
So when you get really to less than half horsepower of your cubic inches, it's pretty scary.
Totally. How often are you doing Concours judging, and what's your kind of favorite stuff to do? I'm fascinated to hear about judging JDM cars. I don't even know what you would look for.
Yeah, JDM is really different, and every different cars are different. So with JDM, and that's a bit of a struggle I have in my Michelin job also. So you think of Concours cars as being restored to exactly as they were when they came from the factory. Well, with JDM cars, there's a lot of leniency and some encouragement for period mods, much more so than anything else. So that's been really interesting with the JDM cars. And as I do research for what tires to bring back in Michelin, because we're definitely bringing back tires that were OE from the mid-70s into the 90s, I'll talk to the JDM guys and say, hey, what do you look for in a tire? Like, obviously, your car is Asian. Would you rather have a modern Asian tire or a Michelin, not Asian, with a tread pattern back from the era? And they really seem to embrace everything that was from the era of their car. Mm-hmm. So that's what's made judging JDM fun and interesting, because you are allowed some of those modifications.
That's really interesting. I remember, you would probably know this better than I, Kim, but about 10 or maybe even 20 years ago, they finally brought hot rods out onto Pebble for the Concours there. And I would imagine it's some of the same challenges, right? They're highly modified, but you want the modifications to be in period, kind of, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's kind of the difference. Everybody's like, so what's the difference between a hot rod and a resto mod? To me, that's one of them. Right. It's in period versus modern convenience modifications. But yeah, Concours are just a lot of fun. And to see them change with the times, change the classes, change the way of judging, bring in youth judging. They really need that to advance the hobby and to survive. So I'm always happy to be part of that.
I bet. Are they successful on that? It's interesting. When we bring our crew out to Monterey, some of whom you've met, the Bring a Trailer crew, a lot of them have never been to Car Week. And a lot of our staff is young. Again, I'm 41 and a lot of our staff is younger than me. And one of the, they ask, what should I do? And I always say, it's very expensive, but if you can afford it, go to Pebble, because it's a really interesting experience that I think every car person should see at least once. And I think a lot of young people, I don't personally believe it's true that young people aren't interested in car culture. They just like different kinds of car culture.
Yes.
And so I would love to see them go to more Concours and experience that. Are you finding that there are some inroads there, that more young people are being brought in or at least exposed to Concours?
Absolutely. I judged a class at the Greenwich Concours that was basically the Radwood era of cars. And we had maybe not all the owners under 40, but certainly, quite a few of them. And that's really great to see. I think people really like either what they had in high school or what they couldn't afford in high school. So now that, people from that era, starting to have a little bit of money, they're starting to buy the cars. And I always, if people bring their children, I always try to talk to their children, thank them for coming to the event, things like that. And where was I? I guess it was at your Monterey event at Laguna Seca. There were so many people that were young. It was really, really good to talk to them.
Yeah. I had my daughter there. Randy had his,
Yes.
both of his daughters. He had his whole family out. I love seeing it. And I hope we can see more of it. I like Porsches a lot. And so, you go to Lufka Calder events like that, and it's young
Yes.
people. Actually, my NSX that I mentioned earlier I bought it from the founder of Radwood, from Art. Shout out to Art if he's out
yes.
there. So you may have met Art Cervantes, who's a cool
Yes.
dude. And so that was at that car before I owned it was at the very first Radwood. And those are such cool events. Man, that makes me optimistic, Kim. I'm happy to hear that, that folks are getting exposed to that. One last question about Concours, because I'm fascinated by this. You mentioned you give a little blurb about the history of the car to the judge before they come across. I didn't even know that was a thing. I've watched judging at Monterey, and I love watching the rich owner sweating bullets, while they're turning on all the turn signals and everything, making sure everything works. It's really fun to watch that. That is one of the things I recommend our staffers go see. But I didn't know you get to give a little bit of history to the judges first. That's interesting.
It depends entirely on the Concours, and they're all different. And if you're bringing a car to a Concours, it's really good to either go to the website and see what the requirements are, or when you get accepted into the Concours, they usually send a nice detailed email that explains what the requirements are. Because, certainly performance is a factor at Pebble Beach. Not all Concours do performance, because it certainly slows things down. So, when you get into classes of 10 and 12 cars, if you went through the performance of every car, you would never get finished. But again, every Concours is different. A lot of them have a category for provenance, or what makes a car special, what makes a car significant. And that's very, very important. Usually Concours judges also like to see someone that actually knows the car. So if the owner knows the car, as opposed to sending their collection manager, or sometimes the collection manager doesn't even know anything about the car, the more passionate and knowledgeable the owner is about the car, the better. When it's owner restored, it's really great. So, but again, the judges have 10 to 15 minutes, and we're very, very careful to spend an equal amount of time with every car. Typically, we come up, we introduce ourselves, and unless the Concours doesn't allow it, I will say, can you give us kind of your elevator speech on the car? Tell us what your relationship is with the car, what makes your car special. And that's the time to say it's one of X number of cars. It was in this kind of shape when I restored it. Maybe it was you just bought it in boxes. Maybe you didn't do the restoration work, but you did all the research. So all about the car, and, went out and flew all over the place, sourcing all the parts. Maybe it was celebrity owned, and anything that is interesting about your car, your elevator speech, or, if you were putting your car on a dating site, what would you put about your car? What makes it interesting? That's the kind of thing that we're looking for. Unfortunately, we often don't have time to go through somebody's complete pictorial restoration 300-page book. But again, if it was raced, or you have all the original documents in the window sticker, that's the kind of stuff that we would really like to see.
Yeah. And in the end, that's what makes cars exciting for me. I mean, I'd love to close by doing a little log rolling and talking about BAT, but that, what you're saying is essentially what we look for in a Bring a Trailer listing, right? Tell the story. That's what I always tell my folks, right? tell the story of the car. That's what a potential buyer wants to hear. That's why we select the car often in the first place to be on BAT. Is it low miles? Does it have a rare color? Did it stay in the same family for 50 years? Like, did it have $100,000 restoration, right? Like all that kind of stuff. Again, what's the racing history, right? Where was it? When was it there? Those are the kinds of things people want to know. And that's the stuff that gets people excited about cars, right? So
exactly. And
yeah.
depending on the Concours, there's sometimes actually points for that. Sometimes it's just a tiebreaker, but it's really good, if people can just get it out there. And then also, as the cars go across the stage at a Concours, the announcer likes to have something interesting to say. And that's where all that comes into.
Yeah, sure. Phil Hill drove this at, Sebring or whatever it is, right? Like that's what you want to hear, the one-liner, right? Yeah.
Or even it's like part of the make. Like we'll have my Gremlin. It was the first pony car. It beat the Vega and the Pinto to the market by 6 months. It was also the only real pony car that was always a 6-cylinder. It's that kind of stuff. So even if it's not about your specific car, if it's something very interesting about the make, like, why is it even on the show field? Well, it's because of this, and this is why it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point, elevator pitch, right? Like that's what you're looking for. So to use that to segue into BAT a little bit, I was looking at your user profile, Kim. You go back over 10 years. You have like one of the old school user profiles. You've been on the site for a long time. Do you remember how you found out about Bring a Trailer in the first place? That predates auctions. We didn't have auctions back then.
Yeah, it predates auctions. And I think I was just Googling and found it. The first car I bought off BAT, I really didn't buy it in the traditional way. It was back when BAT would say, here's some other interesting cars for sale on other venues. So my car, I saw it on BAT, but it was actually for sale on eBay. So I ended up buying it off of eBay, kept it for a number of years, amazing car, and listed it again on BAT. It did quite hit the reserve. I sold it a week later. But so that's the first car I bought off of BAT wasn't listed on BAT.
Was that the Triumph?
It was the Alloy.
Yes.
TR2.
Okay.
Yep.
That's like a car that's been discussed a couple times in the office. People get really excited about that car. Can you give the elevator pitch on that one? Because it is a really interesting car. I mean, you've owned a million interesting cars, Kim, but that one is particularly fascinating.
Yeah. And that was, I think, a car that hasn't come into its own because it is a recreation, and recreations are really getting some footing. It would not shock me if Concours started having a recreation class. And I think there's a place for them. So that was when Triumph in 1955, I think, when the Works raced TR2s. They had alloy body panels, but the chassis itself was steel. But what this car was, everything was alloy. So it was the traditional ladder steel frame, but the inner structure, inner fenders, floors, trunk floor were alloy, as were all of the body panels. And it was just done really, really well. It was the right gauge of aluminum. All the welds were done well. It was just a very, very unique car. I forget what it weighed. It weighed nothing.
And this was somebody's passion project, essentially, like the builder of it?
It was a passion project for the builder. They're in Kentucky, and they just sold it to move on to other things. And I didn't even know about the car until I looked at Bring a Trailer, which pointed me to the eBay listing, got the car. And it was really, really fun car to drive. Surprisingly delicate. When I got it, I thought this car will be great because I don't have to worry about stone chips. It's aluminum, but aluminum also flexes. I drove it. I had it in the Concours at Watkins Glen, and I drove it on the old road course pretty much as fast as I can. I was trying to keep up with a 911, and we went over potholes, railroad tracks. We had to realign every body panel.
Oh, man. Yeah.
It shook the car to death. But that was a very cool car. And thanks to BAT, it never would have been part of my life.
A very beautiful car, too. Everyone was really excited when they saw that one come through. You have listed a couple other British cars. It seems like you have an affinity for them, but your taste is really all over the place. It seems like you like American cars with big motors. I think didn't you have a Saab that you listed on the site too? So you've really been all over the place, Kim.
Yep. A Saab Sonett III that I sold on BAT. I sold a super early 58 Bugeye on BAT. We
Gosh, I
sold
love those cars. Hadn't driven one until fairly recently, and that's about as much fun as you can have in a car, I think.
totally fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was an awesome car. I like cars that are just the way they came from the factory. And
Yeah.
that one had been converted to a 1275 and a couple of other things. I probably would have kept it. It just wasn't. I was in a different place when I bought that. And now, if it was a totally original Bugeye, it would probably still be living here, but still a super, super good car. And the guy that bought it really likes it. My husband took a 1973 Corvette and put a more modern crate L88 in it, sold that on BAT. And of course, my 1964 10,000 mile Tiger was the first one I sold. And that was kind of early in the BAT days also.
It was.
That was a different, before like even, I think videos weren't even a thing
Yep.
then.
That may either be the best Tiger or one of the best we've ever listed. And I remember I was pretty new to the company at that point. I remember being so excited about that because I've always liked Tigers. It was an awesome car.
Original car. They didn't make many black cars. It was black on red with black piping, and they just didn't make many black cars, and just had a lot of really cool original parts on it. So it lives in a museum now. It's actually been back on Bring a Trailer.
Somebody just mentioned that to me before this.
Yep. It came around another time. Yeah.
The longer we're here, Kim, the more cars are going to come up over and over again, right? Like your Triumph, same thing, right? It's been on the site twice, although only once in the auction mode. It's been around twice.
Yes.
And what's fun is we like to put all that together. It almost becomes part of the car's history, right? We've had cars that have been on the site now 4, even 5 times.
Yes.
And that's all part of it, right? You can kind of trace where a car's been because we don't ever erase anything on our website. So that history is kind of permanent for everyone to look at, which is cool.
And it's very telling of what the market's doing. BAT is a primary market indicator. That's when I need to look and see what a car is worth. First place I go, BAT.
Yep.
Because they're actual sales.
And it's 160,000 results now and growing fast, 1,000 more every week. And it's all like, it's part of our ethos. And I don't mean to brag, but I think it's very important because we all care about it here. It's like, leave it all up. It's all public. Look at the model page. You can see every sale. Go look at every comment that was ever left on any of those, right? Make it all public for everyone to see. To your point, a lot of our users aren't even buyers and sellers. They just want to look, and that's great. Please come participate.
And it's a great education tool.
Totally.
Yeah. It's
totally. We're a community above all else.
Learn about a car, look at BAT.
Yeah, exactly right. Just very quickly before we close, you said you're a motorcycle person too, Kim. What kind of bikes do you have?
I have a Buell Firebolt.
I love
first
those.
year. I used to do track days on that because it's got the, the fuels in the frame, the oils in the swing arm. For women on motorcycles, really all of our strength is in our legs. So that very low center of gravity, and I think it's got like a 21-degree rake, it really fit smaller people or women well. So I love that motorcycle. I've got
Doesn't hurt that they're fantastic looking too. It's one of the best looking motorcycles of all
very,
time.
very cool. Yeah. I would like it better if I could find a fuel pump for it.
Oh yeah, that's getting tough.
We've put 2 aftermarket ones in it, and they don't last very long, and that's with non-ethanol fuel. So it's kind of sideline for the moment. But I have another Buell. It's the X1 Millennium Edition.
I don't know if I know that one. Is that the one that has the brakes on the outside of like the brake rotors, like on the outside of the rim, kind of?
That's the Firebolt.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, the X1 was the tubular frame before they, put the fuel in the frame and the oil in the swing arm. So tubular frame, basically a 1200 Harley motor, but they made, I think it's one of 800 in the Millennium editions. It's silver and orange. So that's a lot of very different, much heavier than the Firebolt, a very different riding experience, but still fun, just kind of like a hot rod Sportster.
Sure.
And then I have a KTM Duke 2. It's a 640 single, but it's a gray market example, one of, I think, 75 or so in two-tone green. So it's kind of a lime green and a dark green metallic. And that's a 2000. That's fun because with a 640, you really have to ride it. If you're not in the right power band, it's not going to go. Where a bigger bike, just do the whole day in third gear and you're fine,
Man, you and I have very similar. I think the Duke is another one of the best looking bikes of the last 20 or 30 years. So fantastic. Well, Kim, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. I like to end these convos by asking people what was the last great thing they drove, but maybe rode in your case. What was the last great car or motorcycle that surprised you or that was interesting or that you just really enjoyed?
A car that was on BAT, but I didn't buy it off of BAT. is a 1992 Carrera RS
Mm.
that I just really started driving just because we got it and I wasn't home. And it's like, now I get it. It's just, it's amazing. The seat fits me perfectly. It handles perfectly. I just absolutely love the car. If I could afford to daily the car, I 100% absolutely would. Just super cool.
I'm so glad you said. A lot of people. We have a colleague here who's had a couple of those. I've heard that from a lot of people that it's like, because I love 964s, but it's like apparently quite revelatory, even if you like the regular 964, to drive the RS.
Yeah, I've never driven a regular 964.
You skipped right to the top.
I do. I really liked the look of 964s. And yeah, I just thought, let me just start at the top. Unfortunately, I can't afford to put a lot of miles on it, but I really like the car.
Yeah, and it's all downhill from there. Like, don't ever drive another one, I guess. Don't drive a regular 964. No, they're good cars.
Well, maybe we'll just get like a C2 that we can really drive. It's like, well, before we buy it, we got to drive it and make sure we like it as much,
totally.
Kind of thing. But yeah, that is just really an exceptional car.
Yeah, those, I'm so glad you said that. I mean, regular 964s were not that expensive for a while, but that is kind of over too, unfortunately. So
yeah,
those
exactly.
have really come around. I think it's to your point. It's people my age. That was the new 911 when I was a teenager. So I really liked them, right? Like the early 90s cars, because that was the newest thing when I was a kid. So now we're nostalgic for those cars.
Yeah, absolutely. They're very, very neat.
Yeah, very pretty cars. Well, Kim, again, thank you so much for doing this. I think this is going to be a real treat for our community to hear everything you had to say. We covered a lot of ground. But any parting shots, anything else you'd like to mention before we end?
Just, how thankful I am to Bring a Trailer helping me with really my Michelin job is a mission to get old, unsafe tires off the road. After 10 years, no matter how you keep your car and how good your tire is, you're really living on borrowed time. And Bring a Trailer has stepped in and been so helpful with that mission, as well as getting your readers involved in helping us decide what tires to make. For cars that don't have tires or don't have the tires they wish they had, your readers have been incredible. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thanks for being here, Kim. Thanks for all you do. We love working with you. We love working with Michelin, and obviously that will go forward, and maybe we can do some more grilling of our audience about what they want to see from Michelin. That could be a fun part of the partnership, as it has been. But thank you, everybody, for listening. Feedback, questions, concerns, complaints, you can send them to podcast@bringatrailer.com. And thanks, as always, for listening. We will see you next time.